What's up, everybody? Welcome to Podcast Now. I'm Alex, and in this video, I want to talk about the argument of Callisto Protocol's length. This is something I've seen quite often in a lot of the videos I've made about this game, and I've talked about it even myself, the idea of $60 at a full-price game, and what amount of length of time, I guess, what's the length that is required to make that $60 worth it. And I find when doing YouTube and when making these videos, you find all kinds of different people. I'm not saying anybody is necessarily right or wrong. I've honestly learned to just accept it. I've seen more than enough people say flat out, like, hey, $60 to me is like a 30, 40, 50-hour game. If it's below that, I don't buy it because that's not $60 to me. Once you see that enough, and I absolutely have, I'm truly not making it up, I kind of just learned to just bow my head and accept it and say, well, guess what? People are different. And length of time to the money spent means something different to everybody. So my own personal preference is I go over quality versus quantity. And again, that's not necessarily a shot at people that like 50-hour, long games, because ultimately there are some actually really, really good ones. The first one that probably comes to mind to me is Persona 5. Persona 5 is about a 95 to 100-hour game, and there isn't a lot of extra to that game. All of it is pretty necessary. In fact, you probably could play it even more to kind of grind and get higher levels, but even while you're doing that, you're still having a lot of fun. Then there's the modern day Assassin's Creed kind of stuff. There are games that come out that people feel are bloated 100-hour, adventure games that don't need to be 100-hour. And that's where I kind of come in. I would gladly pay for a 10 to 15-hour game rather than a 30 to 40-hour game where half of it is just fluff. It's just extra stuff that you don't need that just kind of expands the game, but it doesn't actually enhance it in any way. That's really where I come down. Also, again, specifically on Callisto, it's a horror game. I believe that it also depends on the genre when we're talking about any of these things. You could throw out examples of games during the PS2, PS3, Xbox 360, Xbox One, all these different eras. You could throw out different examples of games. And again, there's the open world ones. There's maybe single player, like a linear action adventure game, like an Uncharted, right? Does Uncharted 2 or 3 hold up where you would pay $60 and those games are only about 10 hours long? Is it worth it? I think absolutely, because you are on a ride the entire time. But when you're talking about horror, there's also an important factor of, again, that quality aspect, where I don't think you can overstay your welcome in horror as much as you maybe can in other ways, right? So people that maybe think that, say, the newer Assassin's Creed games have become bloated, right? There's too much stuff, and, it just kind of loses the sense of what it is. Well, you can kind of get away with that when you're an open-world RPG, right? Because you're grinding, and there's all these different quests and all these enemies, and, you can get away with kind of adding that fluff. When it comes to horror and a single-player linear, I don't know what else you would consider this, right? Linear single player, it's telling you a tale and you're going through it. You can't have it be, I guess you could have it be 30, 40, 50 hours, but if we're talking about just the story, you're not going to get that. You could even look at the most recent God of War games as examples of, the story. If you just do the quest, the main story quest, you really will only get still 15 or so hours of it. But what have they done? Well, they've expanded the worlds, right? All these realms, some of them, there's 4 of them that are really, really big, that have a lot of stuff to do. There's a lot of collectibles, there's side quests in it, but they're kind of just adding things on to extend the length of time that you're going to be in the game. The story itself is still actually rather short. You don't see games, Witcher 3 is maybe one of the better examples of long, that's long, right? The main quest is long. But again, these are all open world. These are open world RPGs, basically, is what all of these are, including even God of War, you could argue. So for Callisto, linear, single player, you're not going to be telling a 30, 40, 50-hour story. You're just not. It's going to be, and, again, where does this kind of come from? Well, the rumor of the length of time it's going to take to beat Callisto is 12 to 14 hours. Now, I've talked about it before, in which, 12 to 14 hours to me is totally fine. Again, you could go back to examples of past generations of single-player linear games, and I guess there has always been open world or bigger games or multiplayer games, right? Multiplayer games just depends on how long it stays going, right? And if you feel like you're getting your money's worth if you play it every night with your friends or whatever. But I would gladly pay full price for a game that's quality for that time. Now, maybe it's a little difficult to talk about now, right? Right now, the topic kind of is a general thing. In terms of, is Callisto Protocol itself, well, obviously reviews or when we actually play the game, right? We would know, because when you do, I will say this, when you do have games that are short, and this would go for any game actually in the history of games, it needs to be there for that amount of time. So, I mentioned Uncharted. Let's go back to one of those, right? Uncharted 1, 2, 3, whichever one you want. 4 is a little bit bigger, but you go back to those. Full price game. It is linear. You could pick up treasures and stuff along the way, but it's full price, and it's like a 10, 12-hour thing, but you're there the whole time, and it really is tight. It's a really tight game, and you would hope that for really any of these games, right, you can, again, get away with more of the fluff added stuff if your game is 50, 60, 70 hours, because it is just so big, who really cares at that point? But when you have a game that, and I know I brought up like Kena Bridge of Spirits, you can go smaller. Sifu, right? Some of these Sony smaller exclusive games that they've had in the past couple of years, some of these games are $40-ish, and they run you about 5 to 8 hours long. I can definitely see it, and again, where I'm at with YouTube, I see people that say, hey, look, flat out 5 hours, no matter how good it is, 5 hours for $40 is not worth it to me. I don't agree with that, but I get it. I understand it, and again, that's just the way I think some people are in the world. But those games do have to hold you for that time. You can't have a game like Kena or Sifu or anything like that and have it be 6 or so hours and half of it is not good or half of it is fluff, right? Well, ideally the good part, that's the quality aspect of it, and then the fluff part would be if half of it you just don't actually need to do. So as long as Callisto is there, is present, and is pushing you forward in a meaningful way for the entirety of these 12 to 14 hours, I think it's worth it. And again, when it comes to horror, you can't really overstay your welcome at all. I don't really think horror games would work if they, and people have been pointing this out. Look at Resident Evil games. Look at Dead Space, the original Dead Space, which this game, we've talked so much about the similarities and if this game can even be better than Dead Space. Dead Space is around a 10 to 11 hour game. That's what it is. Resident Evil, these games are not massively long. They kind of cap out around that 15-hour amount. Outlast, just keep going. Silent Hill, you can keep going, and these games, actually, some of these games, Silent Hill, they're actually kind of short. They're not too long, because horror, when you're trying to get people with the tension and the atmosphere, if you keep them in it for 30, 40, 50 hours, you're probably going to lose that, and you're going to lose that sense of dread, and you're going to lose the opportunities to scare people. It does really make sense when you think about it. Horror games can't do it. So it is interesting to look at, but again, I feel like some of it you can get away with better if you're a different type of game, or, you look at the different eras. But for a horror game, for a linear thing like this, I think it's, because you could look at Outlast Trials, which is like a multiplayer, you're playing it with friends, but it's multiple locations and multiple things that you're doing. I mean, that's different, right? Because it's multiplayer just right off the bat. It is still horror, but it's multiplayer. So, the kind of game that Callisto is, I think 12 to 14 hours is fine. And then in terms of the money versus the price, for me, it's always been a thing of quality versus quantity. But again, some people just aren't like that, and that's okay. That's honestly okay. I find that often. I see that often, I should say, when I'm making these videos. So let me know what you guys think in the comments. Do you think the length of time is worth the price for this game? Obviously, we won't know fully, right, until the game is out, but just the general topic of time versus, money. Let me know. Make sure you guys are subscribed, bell icon turned on, and I hope to see you all on the next one.